No matter where you are in the world, get ready to be hooked. He rejected the giant mail-order bride and chose the obese no cowboy wanted, a story so powerful it will leave you speechless. What happens next isn't just surprising, it's unforgettable. So hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share this with someone who loves a good story. From the US to the UK, from Asia to Africa, this one's for you. Let's dive in! The dusty little train station at Sweetwater was always a lively place when the 315 from Dallas came rolling in. But on this particular afternoon, there seemed to be an unusual excitement in the air. The townsfolk gathered along the wooden platform, some waiting for relatives, some just curious to see who might be coming into town. The engine's whistle pierced the air, echoing across the wide Texas plains. Horses tied outside the station stomped nervously, and children pressed their noses against the fence to catch a glimpse of the incoming train. Jake Morrison stood near the edge of the platform, his weathered hat clutched between his hands, his boots scuffing the boards as he shifted his weight. At 32, Jake was a solid man with a square jaw and sunburned skin, the kind of rancher who knew the land better than most men knew their own homes. He'd spent the past 10 years working from dawn till dusk, managing cattle, mending fences, and watching his neighbors settle down with wives and start families. When the day's work was done, he returned to an empty cabin, cooking beans over the fire and listening to nothing but the coyotes in the distance. Loneliness had crept in over the years, slow and steady, until even Jake, stubborn as he was, had to admit that maybe he wanted more. His friends had teased him for resisting, but in the end they'd convinced him to write to one of those agencies that arranged marriages by letter. A mail-order bride. It sounded strange at first, but when her letters arrived they were filled with warmth, humor, and a promise of companionship. She had described herself as sturdy and dependable, qualities that, to a rancher like Jake, sounded sensible. He wasn't looking for frills or finery. He just wanted someone who could share the life he had built. There she is! Tommy Randall, Jake's oldest friend, nudged him hard in the ribs and pointed toward the passengers stepping off the train. Tommy was grinning like a schoolboy, eager to see the moment unfold. Jake squinted against the sun, eyes scanning the crowd. He expected to see a modest young woman, perhaps shy, perhaps reserved, but certainly the partner he had been waiting for. Instead, his jaw nearly dropped. The woman stepping down from the carriage was taller than most men on the platform, nearly 6 feet if not more, her broad shoulders filling the space of her traveling dress, as though it could barely contain her. Her stride was long and confident, and she carried her suitcase as if it weighed nothing at all. She had a face that wasn't unpleasant, but her voice boomed across the platform before she even reached him.
"Howdy! You must be Jake!"
she called, waving with such enthusiasm that several heads turned. Jake froze, his throat dry. Her letters had mentioned she was sturdy, but he had imagined a capable farm woman, not someone who looked like she could throw him over her shoulder if she wanted to. He fumbled with his hat, nodding politely. "Yes, ma'am," he stammered.
"I'm Jake Morrison. I'm Bertha Mai,"
she announced with a grin that revealed a row of strong, white teeth. "Ready to get hitched." The words echoed around the platform, and a few townsfolk chuckled under their breath. Tommy nearly doubled over laughing, slapping his knee as he whispered, "Well, Jake, looks like you got yourself a fine match. She'll have the ranch in shape quicker than you can blink." Jake's ears burned, and he managed a stiff smile, unsure what to say. His eyes darted around, searching for a distraction, any way to collect himself. That's when he saw her. A young woman sat quietly on a bench at the far end of the platform, apart from the bustle. She clutched a small carpetbag tightly in her lap, her dress plain but clean, her bonnet tilted to shade her face. Unlike the other brides stepping off the train, no one had come to greet her. She didn't call out or wave. Instead, she sat with her shoulders slightly hunched, as if she were trying to make herself smaller, invisible even. Yet something about her caught Jake's attention. Her face was round and soft, her eyes large and filled with a sorrow that tugged at his heart. She wasn't flashy or bold. She seemed like a woman who had already been disappointed once too many times in life. Jake found himself walking toward her before he even realized what he was doing. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently, tipping his hat as he stopped in front of her. "Are you waiting for someone?" As she looked up, startled that anyone had spoken to her. For a moment her lips parted as though she wasn't sure how to answer. Finally, she said softly, "Oh, no, sir. I was supposed to meet a gentleman named Harold Pierce, but..." She glanced around the emptying platform, her fingers tightening on the handle of her carpetbag. "It seems he's changed his mind." The words were spoken without bitterness, just quiet resignation, as if she had half expected it all along. Jake felt a knot form in his chest. "What's your name?" he asked. "Rosie," she replied, her voice trembling just a little. "Rosie Campbell. I came all the way from Missouri." "Guess I should have known better." He studied her face, the way she tried to hold herself with dignity despite the humiliation of being left behind. There was kindness in her eyes, something steady and true that went deeper than appearances. It reminded Jake of the way his late mother used to look at him after a hard day's work, full of comfort, full of quiet strength. Behind him, Bertha May had already cornered Tommy, flexing her arms and launching into a conversation about cattle prices. Tommy, wide-eyed but delighted, seemed thoroughly entertained. Jake turned his attention back to Rosie. "Miss Rosie," he said carefully, "you don't deserve to be left sitting here like that. Harold Pierce must be blind, or foolish, or both." Her cheeks flushed, and she ducked her head. "I suppose not every man wants a woman like me." Jake frowned. "Seems to me, every man ought to want a woman like you." The words slipped out before he had time to second-guess them. Rosie blinked, startled, then gave a small, uncertain smile. "Why don't you come along with me?" Jake continued, surprising himself with his own boldness. "I was planning on supper at Sally's Cafe. Maybe we could share a meal and talk a spell. I'd be honored to have your company." Rosie's lips parted, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. She hesitated, looking down at her carpetbag. "You don't have to be kind to me, Mr. Morrison. I wouldn't want to trouble you." "It ain't trouble," Jake said firmly. "It'd be a pleasure." For the first time since stepping off the train, Rosie's eyes lit up, just a flicker like a candle catching flame. She nodded slowly. "All right then, thank you, sir." As Jake helped her to her feet, he heard Bertha May call across the platform. "Jake, where you going? We got a wedding to plan." The whole platform fell silent at her booming declaration. Jake swallowed hard, tipping his hat politely toward her. "Mum," he said with as much respect as he could muster, "you're a fine woman, no doubt about it. But I think there's been a mistake. You deserve a man who'll appreciate your substantial qualities." His eyes flicked toward Tommy, who was staring at Bertha May with a grin so wide it threatened to split his face. "And I reckon that man might just be my friend Tommy right there." The crowd burst into laughter as Bertha May turned to give Tommy a long, appraising look. She crossed her arms, her grin spreading. "Well now, maybe you're right." As the two of them fell into animated conversation, Jake guided Rosie gently away from the commotion. They walked down the wooden steps and toward the dusty road that led into town. The sun was lowering on the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and rose, and for the first time in years, Jake felt the stirrings of something new inside him. Hope, maybe even excitement. He glanced at Rosie beside him, her carpetbag swinging lightly in her hand, her expression still hesitant but softening with every step. She wasn't the bride he had been expecting, but maybe, just maybe, she was exactly the woman he had been waiting for. Sally's Cafe sat on the corner of Main Street, a squat little building with lace curtains in the windows and the smell of coffee and cornbread drifting into the street. Jake pushed open the door and held it for Rosie, who hesitated a moment before stepping inside. The murmur of conversation dimmed as townsfolk turned to see who had arrived. Most expected Jake to be escorting Bertha May, whose loud voice had carried all the way from the platform, but instead they saw him walking with a modest, round-faced woman who clutched her carpetbag like it was her only treasure. The owner, Sally herself, bustled over with a welcoming smile. She was a sturdy woman with silver streaking her hair, who had known Jake since he was a boy. Well, look at you, Jake Morrison, bringing a young lady in for supper, she teased. Sit yourselves down. I'll have Emma bring Menace. Jake guided Rosie to a small table by the window. She sat carefully, smoothing her skirt, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She wasn't used to being noticed, not like this, and the stares made her cheeks flush. Jake leaned across the table, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Don't mind them. Folks in Sweetwater don't see new faces every day. They'll get used to you. She gave a small smile, still clutching the handle of her bag. I'm afraid they'll get used to me too quickly, Mr. Morrison. And once they do, they'll see I'm not what anyone was hoping for. Jake frowned. You don't know that. I see a woman who traveled all the way from Missouri on her own, and that tells me you're stronger than most folks in this room. Her eyes softened, and she looked down at the table, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. Emma, the waitress, appeared with menus, and soon plates of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and cornbread were set before them. Rosie's eyes widened slightly at the generous portions, but she waited until Jake began eating before she picked up her fork. Over supper, she spoke hesitantly at first, but Jake listened intently, coaxing her with questions that revealed more and more of her story. Rosie had grown up on a small farm in Missouri with her widowed mother and two younger sisters. When her mother passed, she had taken care of the farm until her sisters married, leaving her alone. She had written to the agency with a mixture of desperation and hope, praying someone might want her, praying she might have a chance at a new life. Harold Pierce wrote me for 2 months. She confessed quietly, her voice barely above the clink of silverware. Said he needed a good wife, someone who could cook and keep house. I thought maybe I could be that. Then the morning I left, a letter came. She reached into her carpet bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased. She slid it across the table to Jake. He unfolded it and read the few cruel words, "You're not what was advertised. Don't bother coming." Jake's jaw tightened, anger flaring hot in his chest. "Coward," he muttered, tossing the letter back onto the table. "Writing something like that, hiding behind ink and paper. If I ever meet Harold Pierce, he'll regret the day he put pen to page." The Rosie's eyes welled, and she hurriedly tucked the letter away. "It's all right. I should have expected as much. I've never been anyone's first choice." But Jake leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "Rosie Campbell, you listen to me. That man's loss is another man's blessing. He couldn't see the treasure in front of him. But I do." Her lips parted in surprise, as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. Jake reached across the table and laid his calloused hand over hers. She stiffened at first, then relaxed, her shoulders loosening, her eyes shining with tears she didn't try to hide this time. "Would you consider staying in Sweetwater?" he asked softly. "Not as anyone's mail-order bride, but as yourself. Give us a chance to know each other proper like. No contracts, no obligations, just two people seeing if maybe fate brought them together for a reason." For a long moment, Rosie stared at him, her breath catching. Then she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You really mean that?" Jake smiled, squeezing her hand. "I've never meant anything more in my life." From that night on, Rosie became a part of Sweetwater in ways no one had expected. She moved into the spare room above Sally's cafe, helping in the kitchen in exchange for board. Within a week, folks were already talking about her cooking. She had a gift, turning simple ingredients into meals that filled the belly and warmed the heart. Her biscuits melted in your mouth, her pies tasted of home, and her laughter, once rare, began to drift from the kitchen and brighten the cafe. Jake visited often, sometimes under the pretense of grabbing a meal, sometimes just to see her. They would sit together on the porch after the dinner rush, talking while the stars spread across the Texas sky. Rosie listened with genuine interest as Jake described ranch life, the stubborn cattle, the challenges of drought, and the joy of a good harvest. In turn, she shared memories of her family farm, the little joys of baking with her sisters, and the ache of losing her mother. There was a gentleness about Rosie that soothed Jake in a way he hadn't known he needed. She didn't demand attention, didn't try to impress. She simply was, and her presence made the world feel softer. Meanwhile, Bertha May and Tommy became the talk of the town. Where Jake had seen a mismatch, Tommy found his perfect match. They were loud, boisterous, and full of life, often seen arm in arm, laughing at jokes no one else quite understood. Bertha May challenged Tommy to horseshoe contests behind the saloon and helped him wrangle his stubborn mule. The two of them together seemed to fill every space with energy, and the town began to realize maybe each of them had ended up exactly where they were meant to be. 6 months passed, and Sweetwater grew used to seeing Jake and Rosie together. At first, people whispered, wondering if Jake had settled for less than he could have had. But as time went on, they noticed the way Rosie's eyes lit up when Jake entered a room, and the way Jake's shoulders seemed lighter when she was near. They noticed the smell of fresh bread drifting from his ranch house, the flower pots that appeared on the porch, the laughter that rang out across the fields. By spring, the whispers had turned into smiles, and when Jake finally knelt down one quiet evening on his porch, holding a simple silver ring he had purchased in Dallas, Rosie's tears of joy spoke louder than any words. She said yes, of course she said yes, and when he stood to kiss her, the whole wide Texas sky seemed to applaud with its blanket of stars. The town celebrated with not one, but 2 weddings. Tommy and Bertha May's ceremony was loud and rowdy, filled with laughter, music, and half the town dancing long into the night. Bertha May wore a dress she had insisted on sewing herself, and she looked every bit the formidable bride, towering over most of the guests but grinning with pride. Tommy could hardly keep his eyes off her, his joy contagious. Jake and Rosie's wedding was simpler but no less beautiful. Rosie wore a gown of soft cream, her cheeks flushed with happiness, her hands trembling slightly as she held Jake's. The preacher's words were lost in the hum of Jake's heart as he looked into her eyes, seeing not just the woman who had been abandoned at a train station, but the woman who had become his home. As they danced at the reception, the lanterns glowing and the scent of honeysuckle drifting through the air, Jake leaned down and whispered in her ear, "You know what the best decision I ever made was." She looked up at him with that shy smile he had grown to love. "What's that?" "Choosing love over expectations. Choosing you." Her eyes shimmered, and she rested her head against his chest as the music carried them across the floor. The other cowboys in town watched, some with a touch of envy, others with newfound understanding. They saw how Jake had rejected the obvious choice, the one everyone assumed he would take, and instead chosen the quiet woman no one else noticed. They saw how that choice had transformed his life, filling it with warmth, laughter, and love deeper than any canyon in Texas. In Sweetwater, the story of Jake Morrison and Rosie Campbell became something folks told for years. A reminder that the greatest treasures often came in unexpected packages, and that real love wasn't about size, shape, or what someone looked like on the outside. It was about the beauty of a soul that could turn a lonely cabin into a home, a weary rancher into a husband, and a quiet town into a place where miracles of the heart were still possible. And for Jake and Rosie, every sunrise on the ranch was proof that they had chosen right, not just once, but every day they chose each other again.